Everyone has their breaking point. That moment when all the sacrifices, all the silent suffering, all the love you've poured into someone else's happiness shatters like glass beneath your feet. Mine came on a Tuesday afternoon in my daughter's sleek Westchester home, when she looked her friends in the eye and called me the nanny. If you stay until the end, you'll understand why some bonds, once broken, can never be repaired, and why sometimes justice is the only gift a mother can give her child. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The medals sat heavy in my palm, 5 of them, each telling a story of valor that my grandfather had rarely spoken about. The Purple Heart with its profile of George Washington against a purple enamel heart. The Bronze Star with its eagle. The European African Middle Eastern Campaign Medal. The World War II Victory Medal. And the Combat Infantryman Badge that wasn't technically a medal, but might as well have been. I traced my thumb over the raised medal, remembering Grandpa Jack's calloused hands showing them to me when I was little, whispering stories that weren't for everyone's ears. "These aren't about glory, Claire," he'd told me. "These are about duty and brotherhood." When he died, my father had given them to me, his only child. "He'd want you to have them," Dad had said. "You were always his favorite." And now, at 53, I was sitting in a pawn shop in Albany, watching a man with nicotine-stained fingers place them on a digital scale as if their worth could be measured in ounces. "I can give you 6,000, he said, not looking up from his calculator. "They're in good condition, but the market is flooded with YEUT memorabilia these days." 6,000? For my grandfather's legacy. For pieces of him that had been with our family for over 70 years. "I need 10, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "These aren't just any medals. My grandfather won the Bronze Star at Bastogne." The pawnbroker looked at me, then back at the medals. He poked at the Bronze Star with a pen. 8,000. That's the best I can do. $8,000 that would go straight to the New Hope Fertility Clinic in Manhattan, where my daughter Cassandra and her husband Brett were on their 4th round of IVF. 8,000 that would join the 27,000 I'd already given them over the past 2 years. My retirement fund, my second mortgage payment, the small inheritance from my aunt. "Fine," I said. As he counted out the bills, I felt a hollowness expand in my chest. This was the last thing I had to sell. The last piece of family history I could sacrifice for Cassandra's dream of becoming a mother. I walked out of the pawn shop with an envelope of cash and drove straight to the clinic in the city, rehearsing what I would say to Cassandra. I would tell her this was it, the last contribution I could make. I would remind her gently that I was draining my own future to fund hers. That at some point, she and Brett would need to face the possibility that their upper-middle-class salaries simply weren't enough for Manhattan living and unlimited fertility treatments. But when I arrived at the gleaming glass building and saw her sitting in the waiting room, her face drawn with hope and fear, the words dissolved on my tongue. "Mom," she said, rising to hug me. Her body felt fragile against mine, thinned by hormone treatments and disappointment. "You didn't have to come all this way." "I wanted to," I replied, pressing the envelope into her hand. "Here, for the treatment." She looked inside, her eyes widening slightly. "How did you—" "It doesn't matter," I said quickly. "This is the last time, though, Cass. I've given everything I can." Something flickered across her face. Annoyance? Entitlement? But it was gone so quickly I thought I might have imagined it. "Thank you," she said, kissing my cheek. "I promise it'll be worth it. This is the time it will work. I can feel it." 4 weeks later, the call came. I was at work serving lunch to my 4th-grade students when my phone vibrated against my hip. It worked. Cassandra's voice was trembling. "Mom, I'm pregnant. The blood test confirmed it." I gripped the edge of the cafeteria table, tears spilling down my cheeks as 29-year-olds stared at me with concern. "Mrs. Brown, are you okay?" asked Lily, a gap-toothed girl with perpetually untied shoelaces. "Yes, sweetie," I managed. "My daughter just got some very good news." The pregnancy proceeded without complications. Cassandra bloomed, her social media filling with professional photo shoots of her cradling her growing belly, Brett's hands forming a heart shape over her navel. They looked like an advertisement for domestic bliss. Beautiful, affluent, expectant. I watched from a distance, invited to only one doctor's appointment, though I offered to attend more. "It's fine, Mom," Cassandra would say whenever I offered help or suggested visiting. "Brett's mom is coming to stay for a few weeks after the birth anyway. She's already redecorated the nursery 3 times. Brett's mother, Patricia, lived in Connecticut, barely an hour from them. She had money. Family money that had helped Brett and Cassandra buy their house. Money that funded their lifestyle while my daughter worked as a marketing director and her husband pursued his dream of becoming a screenwriter. Patricia had taste and connections and a standing appointment at Bergdorf's. She was everything I was not. I sent carefully chosen gifts, organic onesies, a handmade quilt, a silver rattle that cost 2 months of my grocery budget. Cassandra sent perfunctory thank you texts with heart emojis. When little Olivia was born on a snowy January morning, I drove through a blizzard to get to the hospital, only to find the room already crowded with Brett's family and Cassandra's friends from work. I stood awkwardly by the door, clutching a small stuffed elephant, until Cassandra noticed me. "Mom," she said, her voice tired but happy. "Come meet your granddaughter." I approached the bed where she held a tiny bundle wrapped in a hospital blanket. Brett stood protectively at her side, his hand on Cassandra's shoulder in a gesture that felt more possessive than supportive. "She's perfect," I whispered, gazing down at Olivia's scrunched red face. "Can I hold her?" There was a moment's hesitation before Cassandra handed her over, and I felt every eye in the room on me as I cradled my granddaughter for the first time. Brett's mother watched with barely concealed assessment, her gaze sliding from my sensible shoes to my drugstore makeup. I hadn't had time to change after work, and my teacher's slacks and cardigan felt suddenly shabby in this room full of cashmere and designer jeans. 10 minutes with visitors," a nurse announced from the doorway. "Then Mama and baby need to rest." Somehow, I was the first one ushered out, despite having just arrived. In the weeks that followed, I made do with FaceTime calls and the occasional Sunday visit. I brought home-cooked meals that I suspected were thrown away, offered to babysit so the new parents could rest or go out, and was politely but firmly declined each time. "Patricia's here," was the usual explanation. Or, "We have a night nurse for those tough hours." Still, I persisted. I was a grandmother now. Surely, once the newborn chaos settled, there would be space for me in their lives. When Olivia was 2 months old, Cassandra called and asked if I could come over. "We're having a few friends for brunch," she said. "It would be nice if you could see the baby." I spent the morning baking cinnamon rolls from scratch, Cassandra's favorite as a child, and selecting a casual outfit that I hoped wouldn't stand out for the wrong reasons among her friends. I even splurged on a blowout at the local salon, wanting to look my best. The house was already full when I arrived, mimosas flowing as clusters of well-dressed 30-somethings cooed over Olivia, who was being passed around like a precious jewel. Cassandra air-kissed my cheek and took the cinnamon rolls with a distracted, "Thanks, Mom," before disappearing into the kitchen. I found a corner to occupy, smiling at strangers who glanced my way but didn't engage. It wasn't until Olivia began to fuss that I saw an opening, moving toward the young woman who held her with increasing panic. "May I asked, holding out my arms. "I've got some experience with fussy babies." The woman, blonde, willowy, wearing a cream cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, handed Olivia over with visible relief. I settled my granddaughter against my shoulder, patting her back in the rhythm that had always soothed Cassandra, humming softly. "You're a natural," the woman said. "Are you their regular nanny?" Before I could answer, Cassandra appeared at her friend's elbow, champagne flute in hand. "Oh, Melissa, this is Claire," she said with a tight smile. "She's helping us out today." I froze, Olivia still snuffling against my neck. "Well, you're a godsend," Melissa continued, oblivious to the sudden tension. "Finding good childcare is impossible these days." Cassandra met my eyes for a moment, something challenging in her gaze. "Yes," she agreed. "Good help is hard to find." And just like that, she turned away, drawing her friend into a conversation about summer shares in the Hamptons, leaving me standing there with the granddaughter I had sacrificed everything to bring into the world, reduced to the help. in my own daughter's narrative. Later, after most of the guests had left, I found Cassandra in the nursery, arranging stuffed animals in Olivia's crib. "Why did you tell your friend I was the nanny?" I asked quietly, closing the door behind me. She didn't turn around. "I didn't say that." "You didn't correct her either." Cassandra sighed, finally facing me. "What did you want me to say, Mom?" "This is my mother, the elementary school lunch lady?" The words hit like a slap. "I'm a teacher's aide," I corrected, though it hardly mattered. "And I'm your mother, the woman who raised you alone after your father left. The woman who just sold her father's war medals to pay for your IVF." Something hardened in Cassandra's expression. "I never asked you to sell anything." "No, you just took the money." "Look," she said, lowering her voice as she glanced at the baby monitor. "I appreciate everything you've done. I do. But my life is here now, with Brett and Olivia and our friends. And you're—" She gestured vaguely at me. "I'm what?" I pressed, though I already knew the answer. She looked me straight in the eye, her face a cool mask of the stranger my daughter had become. "You're too old and too poor to be called family. You don't fit the life I'm building." I stood there, absorbing the blow, feeling something shift irreversibly inside me. A lifetime of love and sacrifice, dismissed in a single sentence. With a bitter smile, I quietly left the room, then the house, knowing exactly what to do. I didn't slam the door. I didn't scream or cry or beg for explanation. I simply walked to my car with the calm certainty that comes with absolute clarity. The next weeks would be interesting indeed. I didn't cry on the drive home. I didn't scream or pound the steering wheel or call my best friend Martha to vent. The calm that had settled over me in Cassandra's nursery remained. A cold clarity that narrowed my focus to a single point: consequences. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the cracked concrete leading to the modest split level I'd struggled to keep after the divorce, I had the beginnings of a plan. Not revenge, exactly. Justice. There's a difference, though the line between them is thin enough to disappear if you look at it sideways. Inside, I made tea I didn't drink and sat at my kitchen table, opening my laptop with steady hands. First, I needed information. I'd been naive, but I wasn't stupid. Over the past few years, as I'd handed over check after check to fund Cassandra's fertility treatments, I'd kept meticulous records. Dates, amounts, text messages, emails, evidence of my financial support. I'd done it instinctively, the same way I documented everything in my classroom. Now that habit would serve a different purpose. Next, I pulled up Cassandra's social media accounts. My daughter had always been image-conscious, carefully curating her online presence to project success and happiness. Her Instagram was a highlight reel of brunches, beach vacations, and now, artfully staged photos of her pregnancy journey and newborn daughter. Most of the captions mentioned Brett's mother, Patricia, thanking her for gifts and support, but I was conspicuously absent from the narrative. I scrolled back through months of posts, taking screenshots, noting patterns. Cassandra had built a story about her life, one where her stylish mother-in-law featured prominently and her own mother didn't exist. A fiction that was now real enough to make her deny me to her friends. My phone buzzed with a text from Martha. "How was the brunch? Did you get baby snuggles?" I stared at the message, contemplating how much to share. Martha had warned me about giving Cassandra money I couldn't afford to lose. "You're enabling her entitlement," she'd said last year. I hadn't wanted to hear it then. "We need to talk," I typed back, not on the phone. "Can I come over tomorrow?" Martha's response was immediate. "Of course. Wine will be waiting." I closed my laptop and walked through my quiet house to the spare bedroom I used as a home office. The bottom drawer of my filing cabinet contained a folder labeled Cass Important. Inside were birth certificates, vaccination records, school reports, the paper trail of motherhood. And beneath those, a sealed envelope containing documents I'd hoped never to need. When Cassandra was born, my then-husband James and I had set up a trust for her, funded initially with a generous gift from my parents and contributions we made monthly, then yearly as finances grew tighter after James left. The trust was modest by wealthy standards, but substantial enough to help with college, a first home, or, as I'd imagined in those early hopeful days, support for her own children someday. What Cassandra didn't know, what I'd never told her, was that the trust had a contingency clause. My father, an attorney with a pessimistic streak, had insisted on it. People change, he'd said. Make sure you have options. The clause gave me, as trustee, discretion to redirect the funds under specific circumstances. I broke the seal on the envelope and reviewed the documents with fresh eyes. The language was clear, the implications significant. I wasn't powerless after all. Next to the trust papers was another document. The deed to the small lakeside cabin my grandfather had left me, the property I'd been planning to sell to help fund my increasingly delayed retirement. Cassandra had spent childhood summers there, but she'd shown no interest in it as an adult, calling it rustic in the tone others might use for infested. I traced my finger over the property lines on the attached survey map, remembering Grandpa Jack teaching me to fish off the dock, the smell of pine needles baking in the summer sun, the call of loons at dusk. Another piece of heritage I'd been prepared to sacrifice. My phone buzzed again. Brett this time, not Cassandra. Claire, Cass told me about your conversation. I think you misunderstood. We value everything you've done for us. Maybe you should give us all some space to cool down. I read the message twice, noting what it didn't say. No apology, no acknowledgement of the hurt, just damage control. Brett had always been diplomatic, the mediator when Cassandra's sharper edges cut too deep. But his loyalty was to his wife and their shared vision of prosperity. I was an inconvenient reminder of Cassandra's less polished origins. I didn't respond. Space was exactly what I intended to give them, along with clarity about the true cost of decisions. The next day, Martha listened without interruption as I recounted the brunch incident, her face darkening with each detail. When I described Cassandra's final dismissal, "You're too old and too poor to be called family," Martha's wineglass hit the coffee table with a bang. "That ungrateful little," she began, then took a breath. "What are you going to do?" I outlined my plans, and Martha's eyes widened. "Are you sure?" she asked when I finished. "This is going to burn bridges, Di. Probably forever." "The bridge is already ash," I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Cassandra made her choice. Now she lives with it. That afternoon, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to Jeremy Collins, my father's former law partner, who agreed to meet me the following day. The second was to the pawnbroker in Albany, inquiring if my grandfather's metals were still available and unsold. They were, for $12,000, a 50% markup that made my stomach clench. The third call was to Patricia Wellington, Brett's mother. Patricia answered on the 4th ring, her voice cultured and cautious when I identified myself. "Claire, what a surprise. Is everything all right with Cassandra and the baby?" "Everything's fine," I assured her. "I was hoping we could meet for coffee. There's something about Olivia's future I'd like to discuss with you." Mother to mother. A pause then. "Of course. I'm actually coming into the city tomorrow morning. Shall we say 11 at Sant Ambroeus on Madison?" I agreed, knowing the restaurant was far beyond my budget but unwilling to show weakness. Some battles are won before they begin, simply by controlling the terrain. That night, I slept better than I had in months, dreamless and deep. When I woke, I dressed with care in the one good suit I owned, applied makeup with precision, and drove to the train station. As the landscape blurred past the window, I reminded myself that this wasn't about hurt feelings or wounded pride. It was about truth, about consequences, about ensuring that my daughter understood, finally and completely, that some debts must be paid in full. Sant Ambroeus was exactly as I expected. Elegant, overpriced, and filled with women who looked like they'd never had to check a price tag in their lives. Patricia Wellington sat at a corner table, a silk scarf draped artfully around her neck, examining the menu through tortoiseshell reading glasses. When she saw me, she offered a practiced smile and air-kissed near my cheek, leaving a cloud of expensive perfume. "Claire, how lovely to see you. I've ordered us a pot of tea." I settled into the chair across from her, noting the way the waiter's eyes flicked over my outfit. Nice enough for a school administrator's meeting, but noticeably out of place here. "Thank you for meeting me," I said, matching her polite tone. I know you must be busy with Olivia and helping the kids. It's no trouble. Family comes first, doesn't it? Patricia stirred a thin slice of lemon into her tea. You mentioned something about Olivia's future? I took a measured sip of my own tea before answering. Yes. I wanted to discuss some financial arrangements I've made for her. Interest flickered in Patricia's eyes. She'd always viewed me through the lens of what I lacked: money, connections, taste by her definition. The possibility that I might have something of value to contribute to her grandchild's life was clearly novel. How thoughtful, she murmured. Brett mentioned you've been supportive during the IVF process. Supportive, I repeated, the word hollow in its inadequacy. I've contributed $35,000 to their fertility treatments over the past 2 years, including selling family heirlooms to fund the final successful round. Patricia's eyebrows rose fractionally, the only indication of surprise her Botox-smooth face could manage. I had no idea. Brett told us they'd saved for the treatments themselves. I'm sure he did. I reached into my handbag and withdrew a manila envelope, placing it on the table between us. I've brought documentation, in case you're interested. Bank transfers, text messages from Cassandra confirming receipt of funds. She didn't touch the envelope. That's not necessary, Claire. I believe you. The thing is, Patricia, I continued, keeping my voice low and conversational, Cassandra seems to have developed a certain narrative about her life. One where I don't fit into the picture she wants to present to the world. Patricia had the grace to look uncomfortable. I'm sure that's not true. She speaks of you. She introduced me as the nanny to her friends, I interrupted, my calm never wavering. After I sold my grandfather's Purple Heart and Bronze Star to pay for the IVF that gave her Olivia. Silence settled between us, punctuated by the cheerful clink of silverware and the murmur of conversation from nearby tables. Patricia studied me with new eyes, reassessing. I'm sorry to hear that, she finally said. Truly. But I'm not sure what this has to do with me. Nothing directly, I admitted. But since you'll be the only grandmother in Olivia's life from now on, I thought you should know the truth. And I wanted someone to tell Cassandra and Brett that I've made some changes to my financial arrangements. Patricia's perfectly manicured nails tapped once against her teacup. Changes? I've reversed the transfer of my grandfather's cabin into Cassandra's name, and I've redirected the trust fund I established for her toward a scholarship for children of single mothers at the school where I work. The slight widening of Patricia's eyes told me everything I needed to know about the size of that trust fund. It wasn't Wellington money, but it was substantial enough to matter, especially to a young couple stretching themselves thin to maintain appearances in Westchester. Don't you think that's extreme? Patricia asked carefully. I smiled, the expression never reaching my eyes. Not at all. I'm simply acknowledging reality, as Cassandra herself defined it. If I'm not family, then family obligations no longer apply. Patricia set down her teacup with a decisive click. What do you want, Claire? An apology? For me to intervene? I don't want anything, I replied truthfully. That's what makes this conversation so uncomfortable for you. I'm not here to negotiate or threaten. I'm simply informing you of decisions already made. Patricia leaned forward slightly. Children say hurtful things, Claire. God knows Brett has said things to me in anger that I've had to forgive. That's what mothers do. I met her gaze steadily. Not this mother. Not anymore. After leaving Patricia, I took a cab to Jeremy Collins's Midtown office. The receptionist escorted me directly to his corner suite, where he greeted me with the warm familiarity of someone who'd known me since childhood. Claire, he said, taking both my hands in his, you look just like your father when you're determined about something. I smiled at that. Dad had been known for his quiet intensity, his methodical approach to problems. I'll take that as a compliment. As intended, Jeremy assured me, gesturing to a leather chair. Now tell me what's brought you here after all this time. For the next hour, I explained the situation in detail, the financial support I'd provided to Cassandra, her subsequent rejection, and the changes I wanted to make to the trust and my will. Jeremy listened without interruption, taking occasional notes but mostly watching my face. You understand that disinheriting a child is a serious step, he said when I finished. And while the trust has the contingency clause your father insisted on, Invoking it might invite legal challenges. I'm prepared for that, I said. I also want to make sure everything is airtight. No loopholes, no room for emotional appeals to sway a judge. Jeremy nodded slowly. It can be done, but I have to ask, as your father's friend as well as your attorney, are you certain? This isn't a decision easily reversed. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, I replied. He studied me for a moment longer, then reached for his keyboard. In that case, I'll draw up the paperwork today. And Claire? Your father would understand. He believed in consequences too. That evening, armed with documents signed and notarized, I made one final stop before heading home. The pawn shop in Albany was closing when I arrived, but the owner recognized me immediately, waving me inside with a curious expression. Changed your mind about selling those medals? He asked as he locked the door behind me. No, I said. I'm here to buy them back. He named a price $5,000 higher than what we'd discussed on the phone, testing whether desperation would loosen my grip on negotiations. I merely turned toward the door. Wait, he called. 12,000, like we agreed. I counted out the bills, nearly all the money I had left in my savings account, and watched as he retrieved my grandfather's medals from a safe behind the counter. As I placed them carefully in my purse, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that had nothing to do with the physical burden of metal and ribbon. That night, as I arranged the medals in their original display case on my mantel, my phone lit up with a call from Cassandra. I silenced it without a second thought. 10 minutes later, a text. Mom, we need to talk. Brett's mother called. What did you say to her? I didn't respond. Another text followed. This is ridiculous. You're overreacting to a simple misunderstanding. Call me. And then, when I remained silent, Mom, you can't do this. That trust fund is mine. Dad set it up for me. The inaccuracy of that last message almost made me laugh. Cassandra had been reimagining history for so long that she believed her own revisions. Her father had contributed nothing to the trust. Not money, not foresight, not concern for her future. That had been my father, and me. Year after year of careful saving, while James moved on to a new family that quickly consumed his attention and resources. I turned off my phone and slept dreamlessly for the second night in a row, waking to sunlight streaming through my bedroom window and a curious sense of lightness. The path ahead was clear now, illuminated by the cold light of truth rather than the warm glow of maternal sacrifice. Let Cassandra rage. Let Brett panic. Let Patricia attempt to mediate. None of it would change what was already in motion. The inevitable collision between the life my daughter had constructed and the reality she'd tried to deny. 3 days passed without my acknowledging Cassandra's increasingly frantic messages. On the 4th day, I was in my classroom, helping students with a science project, when my phone vibrated with a call from Brett. I declined it, only for him to call again immediately. When the 3rd call came, I stepped into the hallway to silence my phone permanently. That's when I saw Brett himself striding down the elementary school corridor, looking as out of place in his designer blazer as a peacock in a chicken coop. The school secretary hurried behind him, clearly flustered. Mrs. Brown, I'm sorry. He insisted it was a family emergency. It's all right, Nancy, I assured her. Mr. Wellington is my son-in-law. Brett's relief at not being escorted out by security quickly gave way to tension as he took in my composed demeanor. Claire, he said, dropping his voice. We need to talk. Now. What you're doing. It's cruel and unnecessary. I glanced at my classroom door. I have 24 4th graders making volcanoes with baking soda and vinegar. This isn't the time or place. Make time, Brett insisted, a sharpness in his tone I'd never heard before. Because Cassandra hasn't stopped crying for 2 days, and Patricia keeps calling me about trust documents and legal options, and none of us can figure out why you've suddenly decided to punish everyone over a misunderstanding. I studied him. This handsome, privileged man who had never faced a genuine consequence in his life. Who had married my daughter and absorbed her into his world so completely that she'd learned to be ashamed of where she came from. A misunderstanding, I repeated flatly. Is that what you call it when your wife tells her mother she's too poor and too old to be considered family? Brett had the decency to flinch. She didn't mean it like that. She meant exactly that, I said, keeping my voice level. And you know it. You've been complicit in erasing me from her life, from your daughter's life, because I don't fit your narrative. That's not true, he protested, but his eyes shifted away from mine. Brett, I said, drawing his attention back. I don't have time for this. The trust has been legally redirected. My will has been changed. The cabin will not be transferred to Cassandra's name. These decisions are final. He stared at me, incredulous. Over one thoughtless comment? Claire, be reasonable. That's Cassandra's inheritance you're throwing away. Olivia's inheritance. No, I corrected him. It was a gift, contingent on basic respect and acknowledgement. Those conditions weren't met. A group of fifth graders passed by, eyeing Brett's expensive clothes with curiosity. He lowered his voice to an urgent whisper. What do you want? An apology? Fine. Cassandra is sorry. I'm sorry. Come to dinner. We'll talk this through like adults. I smiled, feeling nothing but a cold certainty. I don't want anything from you or Cassandra. That's what you're not understanding. This isn't a negotiation or a tantrum or a cry for attention. It's simply cause and effect. Brett's expression hardened. You're punishing your own granddaughter because your feelings got hurt. Olivia will be fine, I said calmly. She has 2 parents with good jobs and wealthy grandparents on your side. What she doesn't have, by her mother's choice, is me. Brett ran a hand through his hair, frustration radiating from him. This isn't you, Claire. You're not vindictive. You have no idea who I am, I replied. That's rather the point. With that, I turned back toward my classroom door. I need to get back to my students. Please don't come to my workplace again. Brett called after me, his voice tight with anger. This isn't over. Cassandra wants to talk to you. She deserves that much. I paused, hand on the doorknob. She had years of chances to talk to me, to introduce me to her friends, to acknowledge my sacrifices. She made her choice. Now I've made mine. That evening, Martha came over with takeout and wine, settling on my couch as I recounted Brett's surprise visit. He showed up at your school? She shook her head in disbelief. The nerve of that man. He's panicking, I said, pushing lo mein around my container without much appetite. The trust is substantial. Not by their social circle's standards, but enough to make a difference. Losing it disrupts their plans. And the cabin? Martha asked. Worth even more, especially with lakefront property values rising, I confirmed. They were counting on both. I'd mentioned my intention to sign over the cabin last Christmas, a promise I now regret. Martha topped off both our wine glasses. So, what happens next? Next, I move forward with my life, I said simply. I've contacted a retirement financial planner. Without the burden of supporting Cassandra, I might actually be able to stop working in a few years. And if they keep pushing? If Cassandra shows up here? I considered the question. She won't. Her pride won't allow it. Brett might try again, or they'll send Patricia as an emissary. But they won't risk a scene in a setting they don't control. Martha studied me over the rim of her glass. You know them well. I know Cassandra, I replied. I raised her. Later that night, after Martha left, I found myself standing before my grandfather's medals, tracing the Purple Heart with a gentle finger. The metal felt cool against my skin, the weight of history and sacrifice heavy in my palm. You'd understand, I whispered to my grandfather's memory. You knew about consequences. My phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. This is Patricia Wellington. We need to speak privately. I have a proposition that might resolve this situation to everyone's satisfaction. I didn't respond. Whatever financial solution Patricia imagined she could engineer, whatever compromise she thought might appease all parties, would miss the fundamental point. Some betrayals can't be undone with money or apologies or carefully worded legal documents. The next morning, I drove to the lakeside cabin for the first time in nearly a year. The April air still carried winter's chill, but patches of bright green were emerging along the shoreline. I unlocked the door to find the interior just as I'd left it, rustic, comfortable, filled with memories. My grandfather had built this place with his own hands after returning from the war. My parents had expanded it when I was a child. Cassandra had learned to swim in the lake, had caught her first fish from the wooden dock, had scratched her name into the doorframe of the back bedroom when she was 8 years old. I ran my fingers over that carving now, feeling the grooves of her name. Cassandra Marie Brown, the letters uneven and deeply etched. Below it, in smaller writing, I love the lake, and mommy and fishing and pancakes. It would hurt to sell this place, but the pain would be clarifying, a reminder of the clean break I'd made. I'd contacted a local real estate agent who confirmed that the market for lakefront properties was strong. The proceeds would secure my retirement and fund a modest travel budget. Those trips to Europe I'd always postponed while helping Cassandra with rent, then her wedding, then her fertility treatments. As I walked the property line, mentally noting repairs needed before listing, my phone rang. Cassandra, for the first time in days. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to her message as I stood on the dock, watching sunlight dance across the water. Mom? Her voice wavered, tears evident. Please call me back. I know what I said was horrible. I was tired and stressed and trying to impress those people. They're not even real friends. You're my mother. Please don't do this. I deleted the message and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Too little. Too late. The cold clarity that had guided me since leaving her house remained undisturbed by her tears. The daughter I'd raised, the child who had once scratched her love for me alongside pancakes and fishing, was gone, replaced by a woman who saw me as an inconvenient reminder of less polished origins. As I drove back to my house that evening, a new text arrived. Mom, we're coming over tomorrow morning. Please be there. We need to fix this. Cass. I didn't respond, but I knew I would be home when they arrived. This confrontation was inevitable. The final scene in a play whose ending was already written. They would plead, they would apologize, they would promise change, and I would remain unmoved, a stone against which their words would break like waves, receding without leaving a mark. They arrived precisely at 10 the next morning. Cassandra, Brett, and Patricia, a united front in luxury vehicles that looked out of place in my modest neighborhood. I watched through the living room window as they conferred briefly in my driveway before approaching the front door together. Cassandra held Olivia in a designer baby carrier, the infant's presence a calculated move that didn't surprise me. I opened the door before they could ring the bell. Come in, I said, my voice neutral. I've made coffee. They filed into my living room with the awkward formality of diplomats entering hostile territory. Patricia's eyes swept over my furnishings with practiced discretion, no doubt cataloging the IKEA bookshelves and the sofa I'd reupholstered myself. Brett stood with his hands in his pockets, while Cassandra sank into an armchair, adjusting sleeping Olivia against her chest. Mom, she began, her voice thick with rehearsed contrition. Thank you for seeing us. I remained standing. You didn't give me much choice. Brett cleared his throat. Claire, we're here because family matters should be resolved through communication. We all want what's best for Olivia. What Brett means, Patricia interjected smoothly, is that we recognize there's been a significant misunderstanding, and we'd like to clear the air. A misunderstanding, I repeated, looking directly at Cassandra. Is that what you're calling it? My daughter had the grace to flush. What I said was inexcusable, she admitted. I was wrong, and I'm deeply sorry. You've always been there for me, and I got caught up in impressing people who don't matter. Those people mattered enough for you to deny who I am, I replied evenly. To erase our relationship, to take my financial support while hiding my existence. I know, Cassandra whispered, tears forming. I can't explain why I did that. It was cruel and shallow and consistent with how you've treated me for years, I finished. This wasn't an isolated incident, Cassandra. It was merely the moment I finally saw clearly. Brett stepped forward. Claire, people make mistakes. Cassandra acknowledges she hurt you deeply, but surely there's room for forgiveness here. Forgiveness implies a desire to repair, I said, turning my gaze to the war medals displayed prominently on my mantle. I have no such desire. Patricia, ever the pragmatist, changed tactics. Claire, we understand your feelings, but the legal changes you've made affect Olivia's future as well. Surely you don't want to punish your granddaughter for her mother's error in judgment. I smiled without warmth. Olivia will be fine. She has the Wellington family fortune to fall back on. Isn't that right, Patricia? The older woman's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. A nerve struck. Besides, I continued, you've already made it clear I have no role in Olivia's life. I'm merely respecting that boundary. Cassandra shifted forward, jostling Olivia, who whimpered in her sleep. That's not true. I want you in Olivia's life. She needs her grandmother. Which one? I asked coolly. The one who's too old and too poor to be called family? Or the one who fits the image you're cultivating? Brett placed a hand on Cassandra's shoulder. Claire, please. We're trying to make this right. No, I corrected him. You're trying to recover assets you counted on. There's a difference. Patricia straightened her spine, her socialite facade cracking slightly. That's unfair. We're here because Cassandra is devastated by the rift with her mother. Cassandra is devastated by consequences, I replied. It's a new experience for her. Silence fell over the room, heavy with unspoken accusations and recriminations. Olivia stirred, making small snuffling noises against Cassandra's chest. My granddaughter, this innocent bystander to adult cruelty and calculation. For an instant, I felt a flicker of something soften inside me, but I extinguished it quickly. Emotional manipulation wouldn't work, even when wielded through an infant. What do you want? Cassandra finally asked, her voice small. Tell me what I can do to fix this. I considered her tear-stained face. This beautiful daughter I had raised alone, had sacrificed for, had loved unconditionally until she had proven that love meant nothing when weighed against social advancement. There's nothing to fix, I said simply. You made your choice. I've made mine. So that's it? Brett demanded, anger finally breaking through his diplomatic veneer. 30 years of motherhood thrown away because of one comment? Not one comment, I corrected him. One revelation. Cassandra showed me who she truly is, who she's become. I believe her. People change, Patricia offered, a last diplomatic effort. Children disappoint us, then grow and learn from their mistakes. Yes, I agreed. I've changed too. I'm no longer willing to be the family's ATM while being denied a place in that family. Cassandra's tears fell freely now. Mom, please. I was wrong. So wrong. But you've always taught me that family forgives. I taught you many things you chose to ignore, I replied. Respect, gratitude, honesty. The lesson you're learning now is about consequences. Brett made one final attempt. The trust fund is substantial, and that cabin has been in your family for generations. You're really willing to sell it to strangers rather than keep it for your grandchild? Yes, I said without hesitation. In fact, I've already accepted an offer on the cabin. The closing is next week. Cassandra gasped. You can't. I can and I have, I replied, moving toward the front door and opening it, signaling the end of our conversation. The trust has been redirected to help children who otherwise couldn't afford college. My will leaves everything to charitable causes. These decisions are final. They stared at me in unified disbelief. This family unit that had deemed me unworthy of inclusion, now shocked by my refusal to continue providing for them. Mom? Cassandra tried once more, her voice breaking. What about Olivia? Don't you want to know her? For the first time since they'd arrived, genuine emotion threatened to crack my resolve. I looked at my grandchild, peaceful in her sleep, unknowing of the adult dramas swirling around her. I did, I said quietly. But you made that impossible. Actions have consequences, Cassandra, even for little girls who grew up to forget where they came from. Patricia gathered her designer bag, nodding once to Brett. I think we should go. This isn't productive for anyone. They filed out reluctantly, Cassandra lingering at the threshold, her eyes pleading. We'll talk again? When you've had time to process? There's nothing more to say, I told her, and closed the door. Through the window, I watched them conferring in the driveway, Cassandra gesturing emphatically while Patricia shook her head. Finally, they departed in their separate vehicles, leaving only the lingering scent of Patricia's perfume in my living room as evidence they'd been there at all. I should have felt something. Grief, perhaps, or the hollow ache of finality. But the calm clarity that had guided me these past weeks remained. I had done what was necessary. No more, no less. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of wine and my laptop, finalizing plans for a trip to Italy in the fall. A journey I'd postponed for decades while Cassandra's needs took priority. With my retirement now secured and no obligations tying me down, the world had opened up in ways I hadn't allowed myself to imagine. My phone buzzed with a text from Martha. "How did it go?" "It's done," I replied. "No going back now." Her response came quickly. "Are you okay?" I considered the question, testing my emotional state like probing a wound to see if it still hurt. There was no pain, only a settled certainty that justice had been served. "I'm fine," I wrote back. "Better than I've been in years." And it was true. The weight of expectation, of one-sided sacrifice, had lifted from my shoulders. In its place stood something more valuable than any family tie that required me to accept disrespect and erasure. Dignity, self-respect, the knowledge that I had finally honored myself as much as I had once honored my ungrateful child. Some might call it revenge, but as I sipped my wine and watched the sunset paint my modest backyard in shades of amber and gold, I knew better. This wasn't revenge. It was balance restored, accounts settled, debts paid in full.